For years, the Detroit Pistons made a mockery of Michael Jordan and his Chicago Bulls. At the time, Jordan was the league's most valuable player, defensive player of the year, and was averaging 37 points per game. But none of it mattered against the Pistons. They devised secret rules to slow him down, literally threw him to the ground, and made his insane regular season performances feel meaningless. For 3 straight years, they successfully humiliated him until the 1990-91 season. That year, Michael took things personally and began playing with his team in mind. That decision alone led to Chicago sweeping the Pistons out of the postseason, forcing their head coach and general manager to resign and their star talent to retire or be traded. So, how were the Pistons able to make a mockery out of Jordan for so long? And how did his revenge hit so hard that the Pistons franchise effectively fell apart after he finally beat them? Well, to find that out, let's go back to the first season that they faced off. June 22nd, 1987, the Chicago Bulls have just traded for the Seattle Supersonics' 5th pick, Scottie Pippen, a versatile two-way forward, in order to help their 1984 3rd pick, Michael Jeffrey Jordan, who was about to do some insane things during the 1987-1988 season. Because after failing to escape the first round of the playoffs since his arrival into the league, Jordan was motivated to finally drag his failing Bulls franchise out of the mud and into championship contention. So, with the help of head coach Doug Collins, who molded everything around Michael, MJ went on a tear, averaging 35 points a night on 53% from the field, throwing 5.9 assists, all whilst guarding the opposing team's best player and racking up 3.2 steals a night. Jordan's incredible regular season had not only seen Chicago finally achieve a positive win-loss record, but Michael earning the Defensive Player of the Year award and the MVP. Then, after an epic first-round series against the Cleveland Cavaliers, which went all the way to a decisive Game 5, yes, once again for the 100th time on the channel, there was a time in the NBA where first-round series were only 5 games. In fact, there was a time when it was only 3, in which Michael averaged 45.2 points. He had finally pushed his team out of the initial round. But now standing between him and the Eastern Conference Finals stood the rising Detroit Pistons. Led by point guard Isiah Thomas and head coach Chuck Daly, the Pistons had built an identity around being the NBA's bad boys, a squad littered with size and muscle, from forwards Adrian Dantley and Joe Dumars to their enforcing big man Bill Laimbeer. Detroit wasn't going to let the league's MVP continue on this trajectory.
The guy literally is embarrassing the league. He's that good. He's a phenomenal player. There isn't anything he can't do. And I watched very carefully the Cleveland series, and I said to myself, we can't let it happen to us. I don't care what we do.
However, could they really slow someone down who had just averaged 45 points a night in the previous series? Or would MJ only increase that average against the Pistons? Game 1. Exploiting the game planning of Bulls leader Doug Collins.
Just about every play down is for him, and that makes it real difficult, because you never get to let up.
Detroit devised a defensive identity in an attempt to slow Michael down, knowing full well the exact player he chose to guard Jordan wouldn't really have an impact.
You don't contain a player like Michael Jordan by yourself. You do it with help, a great deal of help. We had 12 players and 3 coaches, all running at Michael Jordan all the time.
Chuck Daly was more than willing to let any other Bull beat them, sending relentless double and even triple teams.
Triple team on Jordan, got past them all but lost control of the ball,
which gave Michael no choice but to pass.
Jordan over 4 players and Sally came away with it.
Placed the brakes on MJ's scoring. By the end of their first battle, the Pistons' intense focus on Chicago's MVP had halved his scoring average.
Joe Dumars, key to Detroit defensive effort against Michael Jordan that held Michael Jordan to 25 points, only 7 of 18 from the floor,
and allowed them to walk away victorious. But Michael Jordan, who was clearly the league's best individual player, wasn't ever just gonna let his Bull squad lose, and what was about to happen in Game 2 would forever change Detroit's approach to defending MJ. May 12, 1988.
Michael gets doubled up. Takes it left of the lane and comes up shooting. Got it. Jordan's first 2 points of the game.
Daly, having made a slight adjustment to the timing of the Pistons' double or even triple teams of Chicago's superstar, now sending help when Michael put the basketball on the floor rather than straight away, had made a grave error. Because once Jordan realized the slight difference in how he's being defended, Michael unleashed a flurry of mid-range jumpers, knowing full well that he would be the most open as soon as he caught the ball.
Horace in the left corner, hands to Jordan. 6 on the clock. Jordan against Dumars, in for the left. Michael's left baseline shot. Oh! Michael Jordan puts the Bulls up by 10. 2:20 remaining.
As the buzzer sounded in the Pontiac Silverdome, Chicago had proved capable of not only just winning, but grabbing victory on the Pistons' home court. A scary fact for the franchise many believe will be going all the way this season. Yet, two facts remain for Coach Daly. Firstly, it wasn't just Jordan who beat them. Point guard Sam Vincent had also had a huge night, pouring in 31 points. Something that Chuck understood was the price they had to pay when their sole focus was Jordan. Finally, Daly knew his original strategy had worked. So, not only would he revert back to this for their third battle, but also add some additional defensive rules. Game 3.
Not a strong suit. Sally goes down to the double on Jordan. Great pass. And they misfire. When's the last time you can recall almost 9 minutes gone in the game and Jordan scoreless? He is so far. And again, the Chicago crowd getting a little restless. Here's Jordan quickly to double team with Thomas. And he still hasn't scored.
Detroit's defensive adjustments, now sending help as soon as Michael caught the ball, resulted in the Bulls star taking over a quarter and a half to finally score his first points. And unlike Game 2, Michael's teammates failed. Sam Vincent only added 9 points. The running mate brought on board at the start of the season, who had only just cracked the starting rotation, Scottie Pippen, was still growing into the shoes he needed to fill, and with Jordan only adding 24, Detroit easily won, a theme that sadly continued throughout the series. The Pistons relentlessly and methodically took the ball out of MJ's hands, being 100% comfortable with being eliminated so long as it was by someone other than Michael Jordan. With the league's MVP scoring just 23 and then 25 in games 4 and 5, it was Detroit who would ultimately move on to the Eastern Conference Finals and eventually the NBA Finals, where they would lose the championship to the Los Angeles Lakers in a controversial 7-game series. Michael was devastated. His solo efforts had worked all regular season and even against the Cleveland Cavaliers. However, Detroit had clearly figured out how to slow him down. So, MJ just did what he'd always done, put his head down and worked, once again willing his Bulls franchise into the postseason before incredibly sending Cleveland home with an insane series-winning shot.
He gives to Jordan. Jordan to the circle, puts the shot in the air. Good! The game's over, and the Bulls have won.
Then, in round 2, averaging 37.5 points, 8.3 assists, 7.8 rebounds, 2.7 steals, and a block per night as Chicago punched their ticket to the Eastern Conference Finals. However, the team awaiting them was none other than the Detroit Pistons, a franchise devastated from their previous season's failures and a club desperate to get back to the final round and lift the Larry O'Brien trophy. But Jordan was clearly on a whole nother level this season, so even though his team hadn't dramatically improved, could he single-handedly carry the Bulls to their first title? Or would the Pistons once again slow the superstar down? May 21st, 1989.
We said we're going to win, and if we win, we're going to win. If we win the first
you'll do
game, we're going to win the series. So that was before Game 1.
Driven to guide his Bulls into the NBA Finals, Jordan got to work. Whether it was attacking the basket, taking jumpers, or having his assistant coach wear his brand new pair of Jordan 4s, the best Jordans by the way, Michael was seemingly unstoppable.
What I'm taking what the defense is giving me. I think the scouting report, if I'm not mistaken, about Michael Jordan is that make him shoot the outside shot. And once he shoots the outside shot, if he can't hit it, then that's his weakness. And now I'm starting to take my outside shot a lot more because it sets up everything for me. You know, if I shoot the outside shot, then that means the defense has got to come out and play me, and that allows me to go past him and get those spectacular dunks that the fans want to see.
But it wasn't Chicago's superstar who had the largest impact.
If the Bulls can build a lead, they might be able to steal the first one as they did in the Garden. Great reverse layup that time by Pippen, who was a fine emerging NBA player.
Because with the rise of now second-year forward Scottie Pippen, who added 14 points, the Bulls were slowly becoming a more well-rounded roster, resulting in
The Bulls have won the first game.
However, the Pistons had learnt their lesson. This failure was unacceptable, and the slightly relaxed approach they took during this initial loss that allowed MJ to score 32 wasn't going to happen again. Game 2. So, as usual, Chuck Daly instructed his bad boy Pistons to go out and relentlessly remove the ball from Michael's hands by any means necessary, sending double after double, being incredibly physical off the ball, and being 100% comfortable with some other ball beating them.
Jordan. No. He really doesn't have the magic going yet.
A mindset shift which resulted in Jordan struggling, contributing just 27, far below his 37.5 point playoff average, seeing the Pistons avenge their loss and retaking control of the series. However, with the Bulls heading back home and MJ motivated to get to the championship round, the Pistons would need to turn everything up a notch if they were going to be victorious. May 27th, 1989. Understanding the task at hand, Pistons point guard Isiah Thomas shifted his offensive focus towards their forward, Mark Aguirre.
The thing that's going through my head today coming into this game is that we got to get Aguirre more shots and we got to get him more involved in the offense as opposed to everything feeding from me today. I like to have everything start with him and we feed off of him. I think he has to be the focal point of our offense in order for us to get better shots.
A decision thanks to Aguirre repaying the extra touches by having a massive third quarter.
Pippen with 2 fouls on Aguirre. Facing up and hitting. Mark Aguirre now with 15 points. And the Pistons, following their game plan, are going to their offensive threat.
That saw Detroit up by 13 points just 6 minutes away from the commanding 2-1 lead. But Michael Jordan wasn't going to go down without a fight. It didn't matter that he was playing the best fourth quarter defensive team in the whole NBA. MJ wasn't going to leave the United Center a loser, so he went nuclear.
Jordan again. Michael Jordan with 42 points. 13 here in this fourth quarter.
Clawing his Bulls franchise back into the game, resulting in the scores being tied with 28 seconds remaining. Therefore, all Chicago needed to do was get a defensive stop here, and they would earn one final chance to steal victory, or another 5 minutes to do so.
Isiah and Jordan. Who else should be in the middle of the center stage here? Watch the high pick and roll. Laimbeer.
Having achieved their first goal, Doug Collins called timeout and drew up a simple play.
That was get the ball, Michael. Everybody get the out of the way.
Finds Jordan. There it is. Rodman is on him, one-on-one. 5 seconds to go. Jordan off the glass. Yes! 3 seconds to go, and Detroit has one more chance at it. Team for the Pistons. You must switch all the way around. They don't have the luxury of a timeout. Dumars for 3, goes for the winner. It's over. Chicago wins.
Game 4. Now down 2-1, Chuck Daly knew he had to turn his defensive strategy for Jordan up to the max. Therefore, he devised what is now known as the Jordan Rules, a simple set of guidelines that the Pistons now had to follow. Firstly, Michael was to be forced towards the middle of the floor. That way, he would run into Detroit's help defenders and could be doubled or triple teamed easier. Secondly, if he was able to go baseline and then get to the hoop, the Pistons had a simple concept to follow. MJ tries to go up, you bring him down by any means necessary. No easy shots.
Look for the Pistons really to make life difficult for Jordan if he goes inside. Maybe a lot more physical on Michael on the drive. Jordan. Clobbered. And that's what we're talking about when the Pistons want to make Jordan pay whenever he gets in the paint. I know he wouldn't want you to say that.
No, you're right.
Jordan's getting a little bit of a more physical treatment when he is penetrating inside.
A decision which not only saw Michael struggle at levels he never had before, shooting just 33% during Game 4 and only attempting 8 shots in Game 5.
To this point, Jordan is not even looking at the basket, just more or less content to be a decoy.
But the Pistons truly retaking control of the series, now just 1 win away from the finals. However, what was about to happen in Game 6 would truly shock everyone. June 2nd, 1989.
Missed shot, Laimbeer, the rebound, and here's Thomas. Scottie Pippen was hit in the face and he's hurt. Joe Crawford is dragging him off the floor as play continues.
Well, Scottie won't play anymore tonight. He was knocked out, and the doctor just doesn't feel he can play tonight. So that's a real severe blow for us.
But you heard the word, Scottie Pippen won't be back.
Now without his running mate, Scottie Pippen, who had been adding an average of 20.5 points, 7.4 rebounds, and 5.4 assists, all whilst defending the opposing team's best wing player, Michael Jordan was truly alone once again. Combine this with being a single loss away from being eliminated, Michael knew what he had to do.
Sellers and Grant must play big in there and help out with Cartwright and Jordan on the board. Jordan hits another jumper. He has 10 points. Look out. And he is on line for a huge scoring effort tonight. Michael Jordan looking for the outside shot. 15 for Michael. See, in previous games, he would have taken that trap, passed the ball right to Corzine, and allowed the other players to do it. Not tonight.
MJ, desperate to achieve his one true goal in the NBA, never took his foot off the gas. No Jordan rule, hard foul, or triple team could even come close to slowing him down.
And a delay of game one. Jordan slices in. Will he try to score every point the rest of the game? Tied at 54. We have had 8 ties in this game. Michael Jordan unties it. 24 points for Michael Jordan. Hey, where's that theory of when I get double teamed like that, I'm going to pass off and put the pressure on the other people?
Even after suffering an injury, Michael didn't dare stop.
Jordan slices in against 3 defenders and scores anyway in a simply extraordinary move. Brought a lot of pain on that one, Dick. He really limped back to half court. He is clutching the left leg with both hands. He is in pain.
Limping between offense and defense before seemingly just switching the pain off, scoring or trying to get a defensive stop, then limping once again.
Jordan wants the ball, double team, goes up high, good against Laimbeer and Dumars to get the hoop.
But without any real help, Michael's 13 assist, 3 steal, 2 block, and 32-point effort unfortunately wasn't enough.
They lost 8 of their last 10 games and no one gave them a shot in the playoffs. They beat Cleveland in the 5th game on the road. They beat the Knicks, 2 teams that were won 50 games. They stole the opener of this series against Detroit and had a 2-1 lead and gave the defending conference champions a big scare. Michael Jordan led them. The fans came out in force and they went as far as they could go, but midnight has struck for the Bulls.
MJ was devastated.
I remember in '89 when I was really frustrated about how this team was playing from Jordan rules to try to double and triple team me and make other players hurt them. And we knew what was happening, but yet we still didn't make them pay for that.
Vowing to never let this happen again. Therefore, knowing full well Detroit's game plan was to just double team or throw him to the ground, Jordan knew he had to get stronger. So he met with a strength coach, Tim Grover, and began working with him daily throughout the offseason, preseason, and in-season in order to add the necessary muscle. But Michael wasn't the only one making changes, as Jerry Krause, Chicago's general manager, watching the previous 2 playoff series failures against the Pistons, clearly understood what needed to change, that being Michael Jordan and how he was used. So he fired Doug Collins and promoted assistant coach Phil Jackson to the lead position, who then brought up another assistant, Tex Winter, to design their new offensive strategy. Tex, who had dominated at the collegiate level, utilizing an offensive structure focused on ball and player movement without caring who took the shot known as the triangle, was finally allowed the chance to implement it in the NBA under Phil Jackson. However, this presented a new challenge. For the past 7 seasons, Chicago had simply been Michael's team. The ball went to Jordan, and he made the decisions from there, not an offensive system. So, how would he react? Well, the Bulls would not only win a Jordan-era high of 55 games, but now in a more equal opportunity system, Scottie Pippen, in just his 3rd year, had become an all-star, and their power forward, Horace Grant, had increased his scoring efficiency and points per game. But, of course, the focal point was always Michael, who, thanks to a 40.2 point average, had just carried them back to the Eastern Conference Finals for another battle against the brand new defending NBA champions, the Detroit Pistons. So, would this finally be the year they defeated Detroit, or would the Pistons be heading to their 3rd finals in a row? Game 1.
Double team from Laimbeer. Back to Jordan for 3. Got it. The drought is broken.
And certainly the Jordan rules don't apply when you're 23, 24 feet from the basket.
Desperate to finally put away the pesky Pistons, Michael was willing to do anything, even placing his body on the line.
It goes up. Very difficult for a postman to guard him.
Now look at the triple team as Sally and Rodman collapsed on Jordan, and Jordan is still down.
Here again, the implementation of the Jordan rules. 3 guys are going to be around him at every turn, particularly when he's about to shoot the ball and make him work. But as much pain as he's in there, he still jumps up and runs down on the other end on the defensive end.
Because the pain of losing once again hurt Michael more than any hard foul. So the threat of Detroit's Jordan rules never made MJ waver.
Jordan, there's the triple on Jordan, and he goes right over Thomas and Rodman and Dumars.
And he's limping again after he lets go of the ball.
As the buzzer sounded at the end of the first half, the Bulls were in the driver's seat, seemingly set to repeat their initial battle victory from last year. However, it was from here where everything started to go downhill for the Chicago Bulls. Joe Dumars, Detroit's shooting guard and 1989 Finals MVP, wasn't going to sit idle and watch his rival dominate his Pistons. No, therefore, during the 3rd period, Dumars went off. Jordan's injury during the first half meant that the Bulls' 6'2" rookie point guard, BJ Armstrong, was forced to defend Joe, and the results, well, they weren't pretty for Chicago.
Detroit now has a 7-point edge, and in the 3rd quarter, Joe Dumars outscored the Chicago Bulls 18-17.
With the Pistons again slowing the Bulls' new offense to a halt and outscoring them for the 2nd straight quarter during the 4th, it was Michigan's NBA franchise who would not only steal a Game 1 victory, but thanks to holding Jordan to just 20 points in their 2nd matchup, had grabbed the commanding 2-0 series lead. Perhaps Phil Jackson's philosophy of ball and player movement was wrong. Maybe Doug Collins' approach of giving his superstar the ball and telling everyone to get out of the way was actually better. A point that Michael himself seemingly agreed with, storming out of practice the day before Game 3, refusing to talk to anyone or even explain his sudden outburst. But what was about to happen next showed the rest of the NBA world that this new decade was going to belong to Michael Jordan. May 26th. 1990.
That's the end of the first half. It's the Pistons 51-43. Things are not looking very good for Chicago, to say the least.
Faced with an 8-point deficit at the half and a quiet initial 2 periods in which Michael had only scored 16, a 3-0 series hole was very much in the cards for the Bulls. Or was it?
Jordan off balance. Doesn't matter.
That's a highlight. That's a highlight film shot. Come on now.
Jordan in the corner. He's doing everything he can, that's for sure.
The Bulls have closed within 1 as we head into the final period of this Game 3. And as they came off the court, Michael Jordan, with an emotional outburst, slapped Scottie Pippen and said, "Way to go, way to work. That was our quarter." Did the same with Ed Neely. It was a great quarter for Chicago, probably their best in this series.
After reclaiming control of this pivotal matchup during the 3rd, MJ kept his foot firmly pressed into the Pistons' necks during the 4th quarter.
This way he's going to move you. And Jordan hits again. Winding down for 5 minutes to go in the 4th quarter. Jordan It's good and a foul.
However, ahead 7 and just a minute away from being back in finals contention, the Pistons fired back.
Under a minute to go. Thomas. Sally tips it. Aguirre steps back for a 3 and hits it.
While Scottie Pippen's and 1 had seemingly countered Aguirre's 3, Detroit didn't stop.
Get a quick 2 and you think your defense can do it for you. Maybe so. It doesn't look that way. Look for the 3.
Jordan giving him heat on the 3, and he hits it anyway. Isiah Thomas with 4 3-point baskets, and Chicago calls a timeout. The worst free throw shooter of the 5 out there for the Chicago Bulls. He'll inbound it. And it's off Sally. Pippen has it stripped away. And a jump ball with 10.2 seconds to go. And Detroit is in a position, if they get the ball, to try a 3 and tie this amazingly.
That's 1 timeout.
Pippen and Dumars will jump. Pippen has the edge in size by about 4 inches. Controlled by Detroit. They'll call the time. Their last timeout. And now they can set up the 3-point shot to tie.
So, was this the end for Chicago?
Defensively must be alive. Pippen laying off.
Aguirre will inbound. No more timeouts. Aguirre fires a 3, and it's off the mark. Rebound, Jordan. And they're going to foul him with 2.1, and he can nail it down with the free throws. He's 9 of 11 from the line today.
That's all. See, Michael is going to get a lot of acclaim today for offensively, but defensively, he's been magnificent.
He's had some big games in the past before the Jordan rules went into effect, and he has a huge game today. And the Bulls win it, and now trail 2-1.
Yet, this wasn't the only positive for the Bulls, as Jordan followed his 47-point night in Game 3 by dropping 42 on Detroit's heads during their 4th matchup, tying the series at 2 apiece and setting up the pivotal Game 5 on the Pistons' home floor. However, it was here where things started to truly head downhill for Michael Jordan and his Chicago Bulls. Game 5, Detroit angered by the fact Michael had just scored 89 points on their heads over their previous 2 battles and prevented them from earning a chance to defend their crown, tripled, quadrupled, whatever is after that, down on the Jordan rules.
Jordan missing again. Michael is 1 of 6 from the floor. Looking for Jordan. Where is Michael? Not to be found.
Resulting in Michael shooting just 36% from the floor and scoring only 22. And while Pippen and Horace had solid nights, it simply wasn't enough. Detroit was now 1 win away from the NBA Finals. But as expected, Jordan responded, pulling down 10 rebounds, shooting 55% from the floor, and adding in 29, as Chicago crucially tied the series, meaning it all came down to this. Game 7, win or go home. As the Bulls prepared to head out onto the Pistons' home floor, Scottie Pippen came down with an intense migraine.
Just something that I feel that just came over me and I just wasn't able to produce.
While it's unclear why, the tragic fact Scottie had recently lost his father and the pressure of the postseason likely contributed, with Pippen sharing to team staff that he literally couldn't see. Once again, the fate of Chicago's franchise and their finals hopes fell into the lap of one man, Michael Jeffrey Jordan.
Michael Jordan had his own team meeting on the floor. The coaches had their own meetings, 2 separate meetings. Jordan saying, hey, we are not out of this thing yet. I've never seen him so animated in a huddle.
However, with Pippen literally only scoring 2 points all night long, and the Jordan rule's greater impact without a clear second star meant Michael's almost 31-point triple-double was meaningless.
What are you saying to the other players, Mike?
All you can do is wish them good luck. I mean, we fought hard. They were the better team. We went to a 7-game series. What more can we ask for? We want to be where they are, but we still got to wait our turn. We're still trying to improve our team. They were the better team, and they played better today.
What's your emotion now, Michael? Sadness, frustration?
Sadly, I'm disappointed, because I wanted to go further. But I got to accept the season that we played. We had a good season. We got this far. We got to look forward to next season. That's the only thing we can do.
When we lost that game, I got on the bus, and I remember my father coming on the bus, and I'm back yelling and screaming, and he's doing all his best to try to calm me down and say, it's only a game, you would be given another opportunity. And I'm saying, well, we've been given so many opportunities, we're not going to get as many as you may think.
MJ and his Bulls, for the second season in a row, were forced to sit at home and watch the Pistons defend their crown, winning back-to-back NBA championships. Jordan was once again destroyed. For 3 straight years, he had demolished every other team in the Eastern Conference. In fact, the whole NBA. But no matter what, the Pistons always proved to be too much. Perhaps Michael would never get past them. Maybe the Jordan rules were impossible to overcome. Or maybe, just maybe, these failures were merely the requirement for his assumed future domination.
In 1990-91, our whole focus were on Detroit. No one else made a difference.
Focused solely on defeating the Pistons and nobody else, Chicago's record skyrocketed, winning 61 games and finally holding the #1 seed in the East, guaranteeing home court advantage against their longtime rivals. But this wasn't the only positive. Scottie Pippen was flourishing, now adding 17 points per game to his already incredible defense. And with Michael fully buying into the triangle, he shot a career high 54% and once again was crowned as the league's MVP. However, regular season accolades meant nothing to Jordan. The only trophy he cared about was the one named after the league's former commissioner, and after losing just 1 game on their route to the Eastern Conference Finals, Michael was not only ready for revenge, but to finally reach the ultimate stage of basketball. May 19th, 1991. With MJ opening the series with a dunk that blew the roof off the United Center, he had clearly set the tone for the rest of the series. However, what followed was shocking. No longer was MJ forcefully trying to take over games. Instead, he was playing within the flow of the offense, allowing the game to come to him. While this resulted in the 2-time MVP only scoring 22, what his teammates added, Pippen's 18 and Bill Cartwright's 16 on 70% shooting, was what ultimately helped push the Bulls into the win column.
I think after that first game, I think guys were looking at each other like, hey, we could beat these guys.
A story that only continued throughout Game 2.
But we learned that it took a little bit more than just, desire. We had to use our minds. We had to outthink the other team.
Right now, there's panic all over the Pistons' faces.
While Michael did increase his scoring to 35, he still threw 7 assists, with most of those going to none other than Scottie Pippen. With the Bulls' Rodman adding in 21 points, 10 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals, and 2 blocks, Chicago was now in the same position their rival was just a year ago. But the defending NBA champions weren't done.
We're not just going to go down without a fight. I mean, a serious fight. The next game they win, if they win, it's going to be the hardest game that they've ever had to play in their lives.
May 25th, 1991. Knowing full well what was about to happen on the Pistons' home court, Phil Jackson mentally prepared his squad before Game 3.
We had to take the physical aspect of their game, and we talked about playing through that kind of thing, and the guys were ready to do that. They were mentally very tough.
So, this time around, instead of becoming angry, frustrated, and losing focus after a signature Detroit hard foul, Chicago remained level-headed.
We would break down mentally and become individuals, which is the way they want you to be. But as a unit, when everybody's contributing, we were very strong and we were able to overpower them.
Combine this newfound mental strength with 33 from Jordan, 26 from Scottie, and 17 from Horace Grant, and the Bulls were now just 1 win away from the highest stage of basketball.
Now the Pistons will be forced to try to do what no team has ever done. Come back from a 3-0 deficit in a best-of-7 series.
Game 4.
I was always very confident that we could beat this team. And I felt this year when we faced them, we were ready. We believed in ourselves. We believed in the system that we've been under for the last couple of years. And it's gratifying when you get to that point.
The Chicago Bulls refused to let up, not allowing their rivals even a moment to pause and catch their breath, completely steamrolling them through what would be the last battle of the Eastern Conference Finals. But what happened as the clock was winding down shocked everyone, because the Pistons starters walked off the court, refusing to shake the Bulls' hands and congratulate them on their victory. Yet Chicago didn't care. They headed to the NBA Finals and destroyed the Magic Johnson-led Los Angeles Lakers in just 5 games, earning Michael Jordan his first NBA title.
Michael, what does it mean to you?
It means so much. I mean, not just for me, but for the team, for the whole city. It's been a 7-year struggle. I mean, when I first got into Chicago, we started at the bottom, and every year we just worked harder and harder until we got to it. And, it's so gratifying. I'm appreciated so long in my life, for my family, for my kids, everything. It's the most proud day I've ever had.
Meanwhile, the Detroit Pistons franchise was slowly falling apart. Isiah Thomas, despite his own head coach being the leader selected to command the Dream Team at the 1992 Olympics, wasn't selected to their roster. Then, after being eliminated in just the first round of the 1992 playoffs by the New York Knicks, both Daly and their general manager, Jack McCloskey, resigned, choosing to pursue other roles on other teams instead. To make matters worse, after watching Jordan win his second championship in a row, the Pistons didn't even make the playoffs in the 1992-1993 season and began dismantling their roster, while Michael Jordan was hoisting his third Larry O'Brien trophy, doing what the Pistons had failed to in three-peating. They were trading away key players in Dennis Rodman and releasing Mark Aguirre, resulting in Detroit only winning 20 games in the 1993-1994 season, which was so distressing for Bill Laimbeer that he retired. Michael Jordan would then go on to three-peat once again, winning the 1996, 1997, and 1998 championships, all while Detroit continued on as one of the worst teams in the whole league, proving that mocking who is arguably the greatest player of all time perhaps isn't the best idea.